All right,
Did you say Deuteronomy 8?
that's it. Yes, ma'am. Deuteronomy 8. Right. Okay. We're going to be looking tonight at, we're going to be thinking about this question. In whose house will you live? In whose house will you live? We're going to look at Deuteronomy 8. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 20. Now, the purpose of our lesson tonight is to think about and discern how we can accept God's relentless hospitality. God is so hospitable. He's so ready to receive us. Just arms out. Ready to have us make our home with Him. And the promise of Jesus is that He and His Father will make their home with us. And what a joy that is to even think about. But tonight we're just going to look at a couple of passages beginning here in Deuteronomy about how we can think about and discern and learn to accept God's relentless hospitality. There are some people who in the church who just have that gift of hospitality. They don't even have to think about it. They just are. And it just kicks in. It doesn't matter where they are. They're always hospitable, always trying to find a way to make the other person comfortable. Do you need something? What can I get you? That kind of thing. And then there's other people who aren't so much. But the thing about it is, and that's okay, because we have different gifts in different ways. But you'll never out hospitality God. And let's kick into that today as we look at Deuteronomy 8 and think about this together. And it's a beautiful passage. It's a sermon. It's written as a sermon from Moses to the people of Israel. They're about to enter the promised land. And so, I don't know if you know this, and I think I may have said this before when teaching Deuteronomy, but Deutero, second, which is Deutero, second, means second. Nami is namos, the Greek word for Torah, which is second law. So you think of Deuteronomy as the second telling of the law, because there are a lot of passages in Deuteronomy that are repeated in Exodus and in Leviticus, and some of them are fleshed out a little bit more. So the whole book of Deuteronomy is set out as kind of a series of goodbye sermons from Moses, because at the end of Deuteronomy, of course, Moses dies up on top of the mountain as he is graciously allowed to see the promised land, but not to enter it because of his failure at the waters at Meribah, when God instructed him to speak to the rock, and he struck the rock and tried to take credit for bringing the water forth. And if you ask me, it's a pretty steep price to pay for a singular transgression on Moses' part. We don't have any other record of Moses during his leadership of Israel of ever going off the rails as a leader, but such is the case with the Lord in this particular instance. So he dies up on top of that mountain, but he gets a glimpse of what they're about to enter. So, okay, let's take a look. What does he tell these Israelites here? Now, keep in mind, these sermons are being spoken to a group of Israelites who really didn't know all of the travails of the desert. That was the generation before them. These folks are younger. These folks are ready to take the land. This is the second and third generation of Israelites that have started to come up and be born and did not experience all of the wanderings that the first generation did. And you know what happened with them. Because of the golden calf incident at Horeb, they were not allowed. They wouldn't make it out. They would never see the promised land. They would die in the wilderness after that transgression. So this is the group that's going to go in. So let's hear what Moses has to say. He says, "The entire commandment that I command you today, you must diligently observe, so that you may live and increase and go in and occupy the land that the Lord promised on oath to your ancestors. Remember the long way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness. That's an interesting thing for him to say, because they weren't around for the entire 40 years. But still, but the call is for not only these folks that Moses is speaking to, but also to future generations of Israelites to remember the stories, remember the wilderness wanderings. And why? He did it in order to humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with manna, with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Stop. I have heard that somewhere else. Where have you heard that? Don't be shy. Carol, go ahead.
It's in the New Testament,
It sure is.
but I'm drawing a blank at the moment.
Well, that would be Jesus in the temptations.
Yes.
Turn these stones into bread, boy king. And he looks at Satan and says, no, man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that drips from the lips of God, as the Cotton Patch Gospel version says it. So yeah, this is where Jesus, he didn't make that up. He got this from right here. Well, I guess actually in a way he did, but let's not go there. All right, but no, that's what he says right there. We don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. All right, let's keep it. The clothes on your back did not wear out, and your feet did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a parent disciplines a child, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Therefore, keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with flowing streams, with springs and underground waters welling up in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you may eat bread without scarcity, where you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and from whose hills you may mine copper. You shall eat your fill and bless the Lord your God for the good land that he has given you. Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments, his ordinances, and his statutes that I'm commanding you today. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, an arid wasteland with poisonous snakes and scorpions. He made water flow for you from flint rock. He fed you in the wilderness with manna that your ancestors did not know, to humble you and to test you, and in the end to do you good. Do not say to yourself, my power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, so that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your ancestors, as he is doing today. If you do forget the Lord your God and follow other gods to serve and worship them, I solemnly warn you today, you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord is destroying before you, so shall you perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Kind of repeats himself right there, doesn't he? Just kind of recapitulates. There's a great tradition in preaching, particularly in African American preaching, of repetition. And I'm not talking about necessarily repeating. It's a phrase that keeps coming up in the body of the sermon, in the life of the sermon, and it serves as a reminder. Remember the Lord. remember the Lord. It'll come up over and over and over again. And it's prevalent in a lot of African-American preaching. And it's very powerful, very, very powerful. So that's one way to get something into the hearts of people is helping them by repeating it. Okay? All right, so let's begin here. First question for tonight. How did God care for the Israelites during their time in the wilderness? So let's think back to what we know about the 40 years wander in the wilderness. All right, well, how did he care for them?
Well, he provided manna for them.
Yeah, and I love that. Manhu,
Well,
which, no, it's okay, manhu, which means what is it? The Bible tells us that, because they didn't know what it was. No, they'd never seen it before. I had one scholar, notice what I did there? Scholar, you got his degree on Google,
Their clothes
said that
didn't
it
wear
was
out.
angel food cake.
oh my, wow. The things people come up with.
As Severus Snape says in a movie that you will see soon, I may vomit. There you go, all right. But yeah, I think that's maybe taking it a bit too far, but they didn't know what it was. So yeah, he provided the manna. What else did he? Not only manna, quail.
Yep.
Y'all ever had quail?
No.
Rick has had quail.
I can't.
Tell us about quail, Rick.
It's like any other bird. It's sweet and
Tastes like chicken.
Yeah.
tastes like chicken.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. The provision of drinkable water, the visible reminders of God's presence in the Lord's dwelling, the lighting and the cloud. Remember the pillar of fire, right? The cloud, so reminding them that he was there. Clothing that didn't wear,
Right.
wouldn't that be amazing?
Yes.
Clothing that did not wear out.
Right.
And healthy feet.
Healthy feet. Their feet didn't wear out.
That's right, protection from snakes and scorpions. Right. So let's turn that on us. Now let's think about our lives and ask this question. How has the Lord cared for us and provided for us during difficult and challenging times? Because the wilderness was definitely a difficult and challenging time.
Right.
How has he cared for us and provided for us during our difficult and challenging times?
His presence is most comforting for me
Never gone
in
hungry.
all things.
You've never gone hungry. You say his presence, so comforting. Yeah.
And even during pandemic, when we was all separated, he was there in the midst
Oh, yeah. He
with
sure
all the
was.
chaos and death that was going on around us.
Yeah, there was a lot. Yeah. Yeah, he was with us.
I think he got us through many things. Like I got run over by a car when I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
He stopped me from being killed. You know,
Yeah.
I fell off a garage roof and ran into a lilac bush, ran straight through my eyes, and it didn't kill me. So God was there to protect me all these times coming up through life.
Yeah. So the lesson in all of this is stay far away from him. My
I'm glad
goodness.
garage roofs.
Woo. Well, Rick, you stay over there, and there you
He's all
go.
by himself.
He's all by himself.
All by
There's a
myself.
reason. That's good though,
Nobody
Rick.
wanted to come to this side of the
I'm
table.
glad you said right. I'm glad you said that. Because he also can give us courage, gives us guidance when we need it, strength, helpful friends. Oh my goodness, I don't know what I'd do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Friends,
Church family.
Yep.
and gifts of meals, and sometimes money. Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
money. Yeah, sometimes financial resources.
He
Yeah.
gives us a beautiful sky to look at,
Oh, I know.
especially at night. I go out. I have finally found some peace regarding my older son because he loved to look at the moon and the stars and all the planets. So every night I go out.
That's wonderful.
Sometimes you can't find them.
I wish we could see him like a kid as a
No,
kid.
you can't find the moon, but
Yeah,
sometimes.
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 Lately, yes. And the
It's too bright to
planets.
see all the stars.
So it's really,
I love looking at the planets. In another life, I would have been an astronomer. But the math, I couldn't. You got to know your math. Man, math was not my strong suit. But definitely, I'm glad you shared that. Thank you. So let's move along here. Oh, so basically, in the 40-year discipline, the Lord did kind of four things. or I'm gonna tear it out of the wall. We've gotten at least 25 calls today and nobody there. So anyway, you folks that are watching this on, this is free. This is not part of the Bible study, but just sharing some of the daily ins and outs here on Old Norcross. So there you go. All right. So there were basically four things that kept happening to the Israelites. And it's kind of a life pattern. All right. God was testing them. Then there was a humbling, or hopefully, there was a humbling of the Israelites. And then if there had to be, there was disciplining. You remember the story about God sending the snakes among them, and the instruction was to Moses to construct a bronze serpent wrapped around a pole. That should be very familiar to anyone that's been to the doctor recently.
Yeah,
If you look on any of their
yeah.
their certificates or their diplomas or anything like that, that serpent entwined up that pole is very much meant to, and anybody that looked at the serpent was healed. So there was disciplining there.
I never understood that.
Yeah, it was an interesting request. Later in Israelite life, it had unfortunately, we are told, and I forget which book of the Bible it is, it's either one of the Kings or one of the Chronicles, that pole was still around and had become an idolatrous mark, so it was destroyed. And that was the only fear. And the problem with the command to do that was that God had instructed the Israelites in Exodus 20 in the Ten Commandments, what? Do not make what?
Graven.
Don't make graven images. Don't make anything that is supposed to be meat. Now, it could be argued this wasn't meant to be God. But it was, as Sandy, I agree, it's strange.
Yeah, I never understood
Strange.
it.
It sounds more Egyptian than
Yeah.
Hebrew.
Well, if I be lifted up.
Well, but that's later. That's
I
later.
know, but then the snake is lifted up.
Yeah,
and
that's
if
true.
you believe it's gonna heal
It
you.
provided
Yeah, so
It
was
provided
sure.
a great teaching point for Christ in the Gospel of John. You're absolutely right. So yeah, but it was a strange command. But Moses did as he was supposed to do, whatever God told him to do. So yeah, so you got that humbling and then the disciplining. But then there was always this kind of reorienting to the new reality following. During their wilderness journey, the Israelites oriented themselves toward the Lord as the one who met their needs for survival. In the land of promise, when their needs were met in abundance, the Israelites reoriented themselves toward doing the Lord's will. This included caring for others as the Lord cared for them. And that's the hospitality thing, that God modeled for them that radical hospitality and expected them to do the same, right? So I'm gonna jump over to Deuteronomy 24 and just read verses 19 through 22. Deuteronomy 24, 19 to 22. Now this is in a section of Deuteronomy that's just kind of, okay, these are miscellaneous laws. These are like, okay, I know there's some other stuff I need to make sure they hear, Moses says, so, but this is in a part, it's kind of some things I've left out, but you need to know. All right, so listen to what he says here. 24:19, he says, when you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be left for the alien, the orphan, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all your undertakings. When you beat your olive trees, do not strip what is left. It shall be for the alien, the orphan, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not glean what is left. It shall be for the alien, the orphan, and the widow. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this. Okay? So, that's radical hospitality. No other nations were doing that. No other nations were leaving anything for anybody. but God was concerned. And this is going to come up over and over and over again in the pages. Yes, the Israelites were his chosen people. They still are. A lot of mystery attached to that. Paul, at the end of Romans 9, 10, and 11, just throws his hands up in the air at the end and just says, well, look, all Israel will be saved. And I think maybe that was more an exclamation than just, I don't know how God's going to do it, but he's going to do it. And he's going to do it the way he's going to do it. And I'm not going to try to speculate about how he's going to do it. Paul could get wordy like that. And so, but from the beginning, his concern for not just Israel, because Jonah speaks to this. And whenever Elijah and Elisha go outside the nation of Israel and heal Naaman the Syrian, or the Shunammite woman and her son who dies, and Jesus got himself in all kinds of trouble when he went into a synagogue and pointed that out to the Jewish people who didn't want to hear anything about it. And they were like, well, now, wait a minute now. We're the chosen people. They're not. But in our Bible, God cares for all peoples. When the conquest was happening, when Joshua was leading the people through the land to take the land, God was still the God of the Amorites. He was still the God of the whoever, all the ites. I had an Old Testament professor in undergrad who called them the ites. It's just easier to call them the ites. He meant no disrespect, but the ites, all the ites in the land. God was still the God of the ites too. He created them. He loved them. They had sinned, but he still loved them, And so I think that's important for us to remember. And God cares for aliens, for orphans, and for widows. I think Jesus' brother says, pure religion is this, to look after widows and orphans in their time of affliction. Wow. Where did he get that from? James, who did not believe that his brother was the Messiah, but came to believe and gave his life for his belief, believed that pure religion, he found it right here. I'm telling you, we need to care about those in our midst. This is going to be, I don't mean to be controversial, but I'm going to do it, whether they're legal or not. God doesn't ask that. God says, care for them, care for their basic needs. We'll get that other stuff sorted out too. And I don't want them driving I'm going to go off on a soapbox. No, I don't want them driving a car if they're not legal. No, I don't want anybody doing that. I don't care what country you're born from or what planet. I don't want anybody, I don't want that. But our first responsibility as Christians is that if we see somebody that's hurting, that is in need, our first responsibility is not to ask, well, do you have your green card? Our first responsibility is to say, how can I help you?
Exactly, no matter who they are.
And then
where
we'll
they're
let the
from.
authorities and we'll let other people figure that other stuff out. We really will. So I think that's important. And I know there's a different government, and I know all of that about this passage, but God cares for those who are hurting. And he tells the Israelites, remember, you were slaves. You. Remember, don't forget that. Hold on to that. Hold on to that. They forgot, by the way. They forgot. And it cost them dearly. It did. So just something for us to think about. Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
share a note from this study about?
Yeah, go ahead.
um,
I love study notes.
regarding the resident alien and orphan and widow.
Yeah.
Resident aliens, orphans, and widows were considered the most socially vulnerable in Israelite society. However, God's law and God himself provides them with the protection they lack.
Yeah.
Again, modern readers should identify the most vulnerable members of society they live in and show concern for their well-being.
Yeah. Fred Bigner, I love Fred Bigner. Something about the name Fred. Fred Craddock, Fred Bigner for Fred Flintstone. I like them all. Yabba dabba do, y'all. But Fred Bigner wrote, there's a little section of his today on the Holocaust. You know that in Germany, right? You know that in Germany, of all the things we could and no words are ever going to be enough. None. They all just kind of, a lot of people who claim to follow Jesus Christ, a lot of people who claim to follow Jesus, they were either active in the extermination of 6 million Jews, or they didn't say anything about it for fear that they would be next. And they forgot. They forgot who the Messiah was. They forgot who he really was. They forgot that he was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. They forgot. The Israelites did too.
Well, I think that's what makes our country so great, because we've got, what, 8, 9 million people crossing our borders, but yet we take care of them. We feed them, we clothe them,
We
we
try.
give them help.
Yeah, we try. Yeah,
We try to take
we
care
try.
of them.
And we
you know?
try to help them to do things the right way. Do they all do things the right way? No. But again, we have systems, broken as they may be, we have systems in place to try to help that along. So, and it's a, I know it's a touchy subject. So, but our first responsibility as Christians, we're supposed to be Christian before we're American.
Mhm.
I can
Yeah.
understand the
Yeah.
fear part, because after 9/11,
Yeah.
I was fearful to even put out an American flag that I would be targeted.
Oh, sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I understand the fear.
When that happened on a Tuesday, it was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day here. And that following weekend, I was working at Six Flags at the time. And so we were open. But on a typical September weekend, we would have been pushing 10, 15, 20, 25,000 people in that park. That park was a ghost town. I was glad I was a supervisor. They weren't going to send me home. I got to work, but I sent a lot of people home that weekend because people were afraid. They were afraid to gather, and they were afraid to be, and that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. So yeah, understand the fear. I do. But yeah, when our allegiances get cloudy and self-preservation kicks in sometimes, and again, I'm not judging, but I am going to say that our responsibility is first and foremost to love God and love our neighbor, and before even ourselves. So
And that neighbors, no matter who they are.
yeah, even you,
Exactly.
even you.
Thankfully.
Poor thing. All right, so let me give you some things here. Let's go back to that passage in Deuteronomy 8 and just look at verse 1 again. Deuteronomy is a powerful book. Leviticus is as well, and I'm not joking. It's powerful. If you can get through the how to fillet a dove for sacrifice stuff, there's some really good stuff in Leviticus. All right, let's read verse 1 again. It says, "The entire commandment that I command you today, you must diligently observe, so that you may live and increase and go in and occupy the land that the Lord promised on oath to your ancestors." Now, Moses directs the Israelites here, I just wanted just some key points, to perform all of the commandment. They could not choose to obey only part of it. Now, I'll do this, but I'm not going to do this. I'll go this far, but I'm not going to do that. Nope. You had to obey all of it. Moses directed the people to obey the commandment. Listen to these words, and this is the translation, the Common English Bible. I want to say a word about translations in a minute. I spent an hour today with Scott McKnight and Nijay Gupta. That's a wonderful name. Nijay Gupta, they are professors at Northern Seminary, and we spent an hour in a streaming thing talking about Bible translations. But the Common English Bible translates this, that Moses directs the people to obey the commandment carefully, faithfully, and diligently, is how they put it. I like that. And while there are many instructions, my goodness, are there many instructions? Oh, there's so many. The Lord's commandment may be summarized with one word. You know what it is. Love. Agape. Our Greek word agape. That's not a feeling. As Boston said, it's more than a feeling. It's a command. It's a choice. It is not whether you feel like it or not, or whether I feel like it or not. It is a command. Now, to just show you that I didn't come up with that all on my own, back in Deuteronomy 6 and verse 5, you read this. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. That's the Shema. It's part of the Shema prayer. When they go to the Wailing Wall, now the last piece of the temple complex, Solomon's temple, you'll hear the Shema a lot, and this is part of it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, or the Lord is one, depending on your translation. So there's that. But note, Jesus identifies Deuteronomy 6:5 as the greatest commandment? I'm going to turn over to Matthew 22, 36 to 40. It's in here somewhere. There we go. Matthew 22, 36 to 40. Listen to what Jesus says here. He says, well, he's asked a question. The Pharisees have come back around. He shut up the Sadducees, and they were happy about that because they didn't like the Sadducees anyway. And they came back to him and said, Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? And Jesus said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. There it is, Deuteronomy 6:5. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so we're just kind of digging a little bit deeper into that love command. Now, thinking back to chapter 8, verse 1 of Deuteronomy, what are the two reasons for obedience Moses gives there? What are the two reasons? What's the first one? Deuteronomy 8:1. It's in the Old Testament there, Carol.
Yeah, oh, I'm there. I was making a note
That
of
you may
the
live
other.
and increase and may enter
Live and multiply.
and possess the land.
Live and
Lord
multiply.
promised.
Yeah. Live and multiply, and so you can enter and take possession of the land that the Lord swore to your ancestors. Kind of got it backwards, I think. Enter the land, live and multiply. So there's this idea of the promise of the land. Remember, the land was the promise to Abraham, or Abram at the time. Notice what God does not say to Abram, and we don't have time tonight to get into this discussion, but he says, go where I'm showing you, Abram, and when you're done, if you're faithful to everything I tell you, you're going to heaven. Oh, he says, I'm going to give you land, and I'm going to give you descendants. And through your descendant, capital D, through the Messiah, you will bless all nations. All right, those were the promises that were made to Abram, then to Isaac, then to Jacob. All three of them, those were the promises. The same promises were made. So we're getting back to Genesis here. We're getting back to Ark land. There you go. We're getting, which is not Kentucky, by the way. The Ark did not land in Kentucky. Okay, all right.
It's a replica.
But I just wanted to let you know that that's not the real Ark. But
Yes,
there
I
you go.
know.
All right. So,
It's a
but anyway, so you can enter and take possession of the land that the Lord swore to your ancestors. Now, Scarrow, would you read verses 6 through 10, chapter 8, Deuteronomy 8?
Yes.
Read those again for us.
Yes.
Trying to hammer this home.
Yes, okay. Therefore, keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with flowing streams, with springs and underground waters welling up in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat bread without scarcity, where you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and from whose hills you may mine copper. You shall eat your fill and bless the Lord your God for the good land that he has given you. You said through 11?
10.
10, that's it.
All right. The evangelists, Bob and Larry, once did a show called Josh and the Big Wall. And one of the songs there is The Promised Land. And in the Promised Land, it's going to be so grand. We'll have our fill from the grill as much as we can stand. It'll be so great with waffles on my plate because we're going to the Promised Land.
Yeah.
I hear it's flowing with milk and honey. It sounds sticky, but we're going to the Promised Land. Now, Bob and Larry are evangelists from the Veggie Tales. And there's a great song about going into the Promised Land. But let's think back before that. What was life like in the wilderness and in the desert?
Hard.
That'd be awful difficult. It's just sand and heat.
You didn't know where you next build.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know when you would next get water. You didn't know. You really didn't know. And the way you were walking and just kind of, and
Wandering.
you've seen the route that they have projected that the Israelites went on. I mean, it was just round in circles, right? But now, how is life going to be different for them once they've left the wilderness and settled in the promised land? What's it going to be like? Oh,
They'll have food, they'll have everything they need.
Everything they need.
that's right. They're going to be able to mine copper. They'll have pomegranates. They'll have milk and honey, I guess. That's the traditional image. Everything will be there. This is part of God's radical hospitality. His amazing hospitality, his relentless hospitality toward the Israelites. He's going to bless them whether they want him to or not. He is going to bless them because that's just who he is. And so it leads me to this. How have we experienced God's relentless hospitality in our lives?
We want for nothing.
We really don't.
That's,
We want for nothing.
Most of the time, we don't.
Yeah, we just,
don't.
we have more than what we really
We
deserve.
do.
More than enough.
We go through periods, everybody has gone through periods. Carol, you've shared with me, and I feel free to share, there was a time where, what'd you have to eat? With basically nothing in the bank, what'd you have to eat? One can of
oh yeah, can of tomatoes.
tomatoes, that was it. She was basically down to zero and tomatoes, but she didn't stay that way for long.
No,
The Lord provided,
yeah, he did.
and that's wonderful. Go ahead.
No, it was going to say, it wasn't because I'd blown it all and thrown it away.
Well, that's
It's like
exactly what we thought.
life circumstances.
Right.
Life wasn't going as I had thought it would at one point in my
Yeah,
life.
right.
So,
Yeah, and we have those seasons in our life where
My
we
mom
get
would
down
make
to that.
Yeah, we all.
cornbread and beans.
Beans are wonderful staples, yeah.
We had that a lot.
Cornbread and beans,
And
huh?
rice.
Yeah,
And rice.
ramen noodles,
Yeah,
Had that a lot.
and
Yeah, it's-
spaghetti and sauce.
spaghetti, something cheap. Now, Fred Craddock tells the story of being a young pastor, and he ministered up in Tennessee. He and his wife, Nettie. For years, I thought you pronounced that needy, because my grandmother had a sister named Nettie, but she called her needy. So it wasn't until I started listening to Fred Craddock and then actually met Nettie, his wife, and understand that it is not needy, it is Nettie. But one of the things that, one of the stories he tells is one of the guys that went to his church was worked at the Stokely Van Camp processing plant, and one of his jobs was to test the cans. And so they didn't put labels on the cans back in the day. So what he would do is he would throw the cans down. His job was to check and see what was in them. So at the end of the day, I love what Craddock says, they were poor as Job's turkey. And he would come by and he would bring all these cans to the parsonage. And he says, and we were grateful to get it. He said, but I would come in from working and I would ask Nettie, I'd say, well, what are we having for supper? And she said, I don't know. I haven't opened the cans yet. So they didn't know what they were going to get, but that's all they had. But they were grateful to get it. Yeah. So Carol, Miss Garrison.
Yeah. I think when we have times like that, it does us good. I think we need that.
Yeah.
And my thinking about the present is America is having a really bad time now. And in a way, I think it's really good because there are people in this world, unless they personally experience bad things, in other words, I've been praying, I've told you this for years, for people to wake up.
Yes, sir.
And so if they personally suffer, God gets their attention. They think they're great and they're making a lot of money and so forth and so on. So I think it's good we have some bad times.
Yeah, I think history has borne this out. And in the Bible, we see
Yeah.
God does some of his greatest work with some of the worst. I mean, it happens. We don't want
We
to.
get a little cocky sometimes and we have it too good.
Yeah, you're right, Carol. But God just seems to show off in those moments in our life.
So we have to look up.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, it very
Mhm.
much. Okay. Well, thank you, Carol. And all right. So basically, in this lesson tonight, we're looking at God's relentless hospitality. And as she mentioned just here, I'll just say this and then we're going to be done. There is a temptation with abundance. And one of the temptations is Jesus told a story about a man who had a bumper crop one year and he didn't have anywhere to put it. So he says, oh, well, I know what I'll do with what I have amassed. I will build bigger barns and I will put my stuff in my barns. And then, like Solomon said, I'll kick back, eat, drink, and be merry. That's Ecclesiastes right there, buddy. But then, God comes to him that night and calls him a fool and says, you're going to die tonight, and then who's going to have your stuff? So the thing there is to not be arrogant about, and when you do have a bumper crop, when we do have those opposite seasons of what we've been talking about, to give God glory, what tends to happen is we tend to only go to God when we're hurting and when we're in need. And so it happens quite a bit. When we're sailing and everything's good, we may give the shout out. But then after that, man, it's just, but what we need to be doing is praising God always. Whether we're in a storm or whether the weather's like this week down here, beautiful. We need to always remember where it all comes from all the time. And it is God. And the Israelites struggle with this. They'll struggle mightily with it. Their kings will struggle mightily with it. But there was one king who would not. And we are all grateful for that. So let me pray as we close out tonight. Oh, loving Lord, thank you for providing warmth. Thank you for providing shelter for us in a world that can sometimes feel cold and lonely. Lord, keep us sensitive to those who feel as if they are away from home. Lord, you can be in a room full of people and be all alone. Help us to be sensitive. Move us so that they will find in us those that feel so alone, that they'll find in us generous and loving friends. Show us where to put up our hot chocolate stands and just to give people a cup of whatever they need, be it hot or cold. Help us to be there for them, Lord. Always in Jesus' name. Amen. And thank y'all. The last lesson in this series is next week. Gospel John, chapter 1. See ya.
It's been a good series.